Hello, how are you? This is Hina from Team Wallath, and here I am with the first session of our crash course. Actually, before this, we discussed the syllabus and how I will go about doing the crash course for UGC Net English Literature. Well, very recently, Kalyani ma'am was live talking on our channel about how she will go with her course, right? Mine, of course, is crash. Hers, of course, is comprehensive. Mine is free for everybody. Hers is paid. But then you will get the knowledge from me, you will get more intense knowledge from her. Everything depends on you. Here we are trying to help you in whatever way we can, right, to help build a beautiful career in English literature. So I will start with literary theory. That is my plan. Today, I will talk about the major literary theories, and then there will be another session where we will be discussing the question answers. Okay, so let's start. Why literary theory evolved after World War II? Think about it. See, before the war, humanism believed that the world made sense. People believed that literature was beautiful, it possessed a fixed moral truth, there was something universal about literature. But then the horrors of the World War came. There was the Holocaust, the atomic bomb, the devastation, and therefore intellectuals realized that everything is broken: human systems, human logic, as well as human literature. Actually, linguists said that language had not stopped the war, rather, it had been used for propaganda. Yes, it had been used to devastate the minds of the people, to manipulate them, to corrupt them. That is what language was used for. And therefore, after World War II, the theory was born out of a deep skepticism. Okay, basically it's a tool. You can say this literary theory is a tool to look beneath the surface of a text. Up on the surface is creamy layer, but what is there beneath the text? How power, language, and ideology secretly manipulate us, right? You can say that literary theories are just like colored sunglasses. Put on a colored sunglass of Marxism, you will see economic exploitation. See, I'm wearing a sunglass of Marxism. What am I seeing? Economic exploitation. Then I put on a sunglass of feminism. What do I see? Patriarchal oppression, so on and so forth. So today I'm going to help you master five core movements that NTA loves to test. Five core post-war literary theories that are essential for our exam. These are going to be divided into chapters. So the first chapter is structuralism. This is actually called as the orderly phase. Why? You will understand very soon. With structuralism, please associate the theorist Ferdinand de Saussure. Who will you associate with structuralism? Please tell me. Saussure. Think of structuralism as an orderly phase of theory. Structuralists do not care about the emotional meaning of a single poem. Rather, they look at literature as a game of chess. How in chess, an individual knight, an individual pawn does not matter by itself. An individual king also will be powerless in chess. Chess is a game where, rules of the game matter more. Rules of the game give the piece a power. Rules of the game will give knight the power, the queen the power, the horse the power in the game of chess. Similarly, in the literary theory of structuralism, you seek to find the underlying structure or the rules. Structuralism is all about rules that govern all human culture and literature. Will you remember why structuralism is called as the orderly phase? Because it seeks to find the rules that govern literature and culture. And now talk about Saussure. He's actually called as the godfather of this movement. He is a Swiss linguist. He is Ferdinand de Saussure. And there was this work of his, posthumous work, which was called as Course in General Linguistics, which was published in the year 1916, which became the bedrock for post-war theorists of the 1950s and 1960s. Just give me 1 minute. Let me adjust my screen. I feel I'm a little far away from the mic. Am I good now? Audible nicely? Okay, let's continue. So Saussure wrote a book called A Course in General Linguistics, which was published posthumously in the year 1916, which actually became a base for structuralism. Saussure also gave us a formula which UGC Net loves to ask again and again. Saussure said that sign is made up of two things, the signifier and the signified. Okay. Basically, signifier is the physical form that I see around. This is a mic, or this is a dinosaur toy, this is a towel. Basically, these names, okay, the sound waves or the letters written on the page or that I know, that is the signifier. Signified is the mental concept or the image that pops into my head when I hear the signifier. When I heard the word mic, instantly this came in my mind. When I heard the word dinosaur toy, instantly this came in my mind. When I read the word towel, maybe on the page, instantly this came in my mind. But interestingly, he argued that the connection between the word mic and the real mic is arbitrary. There is, like, he gave an example of cat. You read CAT on the screen, that's a signifier. Signified, you find the image of cat in your mind, but the connection between the signifier cat and the mental image of cat is arbitrary. It is not at all systematically connected, because there is no natural reason a cat should be called a cat, right? Meaning is relational, which means I know what a cat is only because it's not a mat or a bat or a rat. Do you understand? It's easy. It's very easy. So sign is made up of signifier and signified, the important formula given by Saussure in his talking about structuralism as a literary theory. Let's move on. Now, as structuralism evolved post-war, there is someone who got connected to it strongly. His name is Roland Barthes. He wrote a book that was published in the year 1957 called Mythologies. And it was Roland Barthes, the structuralist, who showed that how society takes ordinary signs and turns them into myths. For example, an ordinary sign like a bottle of wine or sport, it can easily become a bourgeois myth. A bourgeois, a socially constructed idea seems completely natural. To make a socially constructed idea seem completely natural, that is how society takes ordinary signs and turns them into myths. Society does that. Okay. Now, few terms that you should know and connect them to structuralism as soon as they pop up in the exam are, these terms related to structuralism are, read them with me: binary opposites, langue and parole, arbitrary signs, universal grammar. Will you remember? Yes, you will. More on structuralism in my next video. Now I come to chapter number 2. The second core literary theory in today's course is called post-structuralism and deconstruction. Structuralism was the orderly phase. Now come to the disorderly phase, or the chaotic phase, or the chaos phase. It is called post-structuralism and deconstruction. Please remember the name here, Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida. Look, if structuralism built an orderly house of language, something that blew this order was post-structuralism and deconstruction. Why is that so? In the late 1960s, the critics realized, if language is arbitrary, remember, what did Saussure say? The connection between signifier and signified is arbitrary. So now the critics said that if language is arbitrary, it is based only on differences, then how can the meaning of that text be stable? No. Jacques Derrida became the champion of this chaos, In 1967, Derrida published his 2 monumental texts on deconstruction. These were called Of Grammatology and Writing and Difference. Remember, the 2 important works by Derrida on deconstruction are Of Grammatology, second, Writing and Difference. Derrida attacked what he called logocentrism. Many a times this term will appear in exam, logocentrism. What is it? Who attacked it? Derrida attacked it. Logocentrism is the traditional Western obsession with believing that there is an ultimate center of truth or a fixed center of truth. That center can be God, religion, reason, author. But Derrida attacked it. Derrida denied logocentrism. What did Derrida say? He said there is nothing outside the text or there is no outside the text. Everything is trapped in language. In fact, Derrida coined the famous term difference. Okay, it is difference with an A. It becomes difference. Difference literally means that meaning is always different, or difference also means that meaning is always deferred or postponed. Very easy example. Now we have digital dictionaries, but open a textual dictionary, the one on a page. You look up a word in the dictionary and it gives you more words related to it. When you look up those words, it gives you even more words, which means you actually never touch the ultimate meaning of a single word. Language is not stable. That is what deconstruction is, championed by Derrida. But the critics or the deconstructionists said one thing. When you are deconstructing a text, it does not mean that you're destroying it. No, no, no. You are looking for its aporia. What is aporia? Again, very important term, which means when you deconstruct a text, you're looking for a point of total blindness or logical contradiction where the text undermines its own argument. The text does not believe in its own argument. Aporia, a point of total blindness where the text undermines its own argument. Okay? Now, during this exact transition, this is very important. I told you Roland Barthes was related to structuralism, but he converted to post structuralism with his essay named The Death of the Author. Who wrote The Death of the Author, published in 1967? Roland Barthes. Barthes actually argued that to give a text an author is to impose a limit to it. As soon as a text is published, the author's intentions are completely dead. Whose intentions come in importance or forefront when a text is published? The reader. The reader is important. The mind of the reader. What happens in the mind of the reader with that text is the meaning of the text. It's the death of the author. Okay. And now with post-structuralism, you will connect these following theorists. They are the titans of post-structuralism. Obviously, Jacques Derrida, Roland Barthes, Michel Foucault, and Julia Kristeva. Will you remember? More on post-structuralism in my next video. Now we come to chapter number 3, which is called psychoanalytic theory or psychoanalysis, which is rewriting the mind. Which theorist will you connect with psychoanalysis? Please tell me. Jacques Lacan, with his The Linguistic Unconscious. Jacques Lacan. Listen now. Freud started it before the wars, but the post-World War II era belongs entirely to Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst. You know what did Jacques Lacan do? He took Freud's ideas about the unconscious. Freud had spoken about the unconscious way, way before. But what did Lacan do? He systematically organized, taking the idea of the unconscious mind from Freud. And Lacan then rewrote it using Saussure's structuralist linguistics. Will you remember this? What did Lacan do? So interesting. He took the ideas from Freud, rewrote them in the style of Saussure. And the most famous phrase by Lacan is, quote, "The unconscious is structured like a language." The unconscious is structured like a language. Come, listen to this. Lacan's 3 orders of human development are, again, a common question found in exams all over India. The 3 orders of human development, according to Lacan in psychoanalysis, are: first is the imaginary order, second is the symbolic order, and third is the real order. The imaginary order is the first order, which includes the mirror stage. It occurs when a child is between 6 months to 18 months. Basically, during the imaginary order, an infant looks into the mirror, sees himself or herself, sees a very unified reflection, a complete being, and mistakenly thinks, wow, I am whole, I am perfect. That is how the children think. Like, they are so happy when they look themselves in the mirror. So, this order, imaginary order, that includes the mirror stage, is actually the realm of images and illusion. It is illusion, it's actually not real. Real order is third. Come to the second order, which is the symbolic order. This is when the child learns the language, his native language or English or whatever. So, when the child enters the world of language, society, and social rules, he enters this realm which is called as name of the father or name of the law. Here he realizes that he's not perfect or whole. In fact, he's defined by mank or lack. Lack or mank. Okay? And language becomes a desperate attempt to fill this incompleteness, to fill this void, to try to become whole. Okay, this is the symbolic order. And now break everything and come to the real order, which is terrifying, unrepresentable reality that lies beyond language. It cannot be spoken or captured, it can only be felt when the symbolic order breaks down. And you know what did Lacan do? When he analyzed literature, we actually start looking at how characters are driven by repressed desires and how they navigate the trap of the symbolic order. Will you remember? That is how novels are created, works are created, texts are created. Characters driven by desires that are repressed, that are literally buried inside them. They try to find way out of the symbolic order. Okay? Lovely. More on psychoanalysis, as I told you in my coming video. Now come to the fourth core literary theory of the day in our crash course, which is called Marxist literary theory. It has ideology and apparatuses. I will talk about all these apparatuses. And the theorist connected with Marxism or Marxist literary theory is Louis Althusser. Louis Althusser. Now let's move away, from literature. Let's come to politics and economics. It's called post World War II Marxist theory. See, traditional Marxism spoke of the economic basis, like it talked of factories, money, labor. But post war Marxists realized something, that capitalism does not just control our wallet, it does not control our social status, it actually controls our mind through culture and literature. And that is how Marxism got connected to literature. Do you understand? As I told you, who's the most important post-war Marxist in our net syllabus? He's Louis Althusser. He actually wanted to know why the working class does not revolt every single day. Why the working class is not raising its voice against all the atrocities it is facing every single day. Why? And he gave the answer himself. He said it's because of ideology. What has been made normal in our minds? What is ideology? Come listen. Althusser explains that the state controls our minds using two distinct tools, ISA and RSA. First comes RSA, which is repressive state apparatuses. These control us by physical force. Look at the police, the army, the prison system, the judiciary. That is the physical force that controls the people. That is the RSA, or the repressive state apparatuses. And then comes the ISA, ideological state apparatuses. They control our minds. They manipulate our beliefs. ISA includes schools, churches, families, literature, and media. And this ISA, ideological state apparatus, it brainwashes us into accepting that capitalism is normal. Althusser calls this process as interpellation, a term that has been asked. What is interpellation? The process by which ideology hails you as a subject, making you believe that you're acting out of free will, but no, you're actually following a script, you're following law, order, you're following the manipulative mind that you are made to believe in because of ISAs. What is interpellation? The process by which ideology hails you as a subject, making you believe you're acting out of free will, but you are not in reality. Loved it. Let's move on. Now, alongside Althusser, There is another important Marxist from America. His name is Frederick Jameson. And he gave us this term, always historicize, always historicize. And in the book written by Frederick Jameson, which was called The Political Unconscious, Jameson argued that all cultural texts are coded. They are coded with an underlying political subtext that reflects class struggle. Yes, people are struggling, but because of interpellation, we have now become somebody else's puppet, right? And now we come to the last core literary theory of the day. The name of it is post-colonial theory, connected with the empire rights back. Now, the three important theorists, or you can say the holy trinity of post-colonialism are, name them with me, Edward Said, Homi K. Bhabha, and Gayatri Spivak. This theory, post-colonial theory, exploded in the late 1970s. Why? Because the former colonies started gaining independence and they started dismantling or breaking Western intellectual dominance with their works. They wrote about how they were controlled, how the language is theirs now. Now, we'll talk about all these three people. First, let's start with Edward Said and his breakthrough work of 1978, which is called Orientalism. Officially, post-colonial theory was actually started because of this work, Orientalism of 1978 by Said. Said argued that West, that is called as Occident, West, that is Occident, has created a very fake image of the East or the Orient. What is this fake image that has been created by the Occident of the Orient? That the Orient is fake, exotic, lazy, dangerous, irrational, weak. And why such a fake image has been created of the East or the Orient? So that the West can claim that, it was our moral duty to conquer you. It was our moral duty to civilize you. It was the white man's burden to educate you, to bring literature to your country, to literally, teach you how to walk and talk. Oh God, that is what Said said. After Said comes Homi K. Bhabha. Bhabha looked at the psychological relationship between the colonizer and the colonized with his work, The Location of Culture. In The Location of Culture, Homi K. Bhabha gave us a 3 gold mine concept for exams. Now, these 3 terms that Bhabha gave in his Location of Culture are first, mimicry, second, hybridity, and third, the third space. Talk about mimicry. Look, the colonizer wants that the colonizer should copy them, but just almost be the same, not the quite. Copy us, try to be like us, but almost the same, not quite. For example, just think of an Indian officer during the colonial times. He dressed as Britishers, he spoke as Britishers, but this mimicry was dangerous. Why? Because it mocks the colonizer's authority. The next term that Bhabha introduced is hybridity. Obviously, when the colonizers and the colonized live together, their cultures mingle or blend. This blending of culture creates something entirely new. Hybridity. And then comes the third space. This is the ambivalent or the unstable space where cultural identity is negotiated. Cultural identity of who? The colonizer and the colonized. Nice? And now the third in the holy trinity of post-colonial theory, after Edward Said, Homi K. Bhabha, is our Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak. She asked a question, can the subaltern speak? With her essay titled the same. It was published in the year 1988 called Can the Subaltern Speak? Subaltern is the marginalized. Subaltern is the oppressed. Subaltern is the poor and the powerless. These people in the society, this term was actually borrowed from Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist. Now Spivak asked the question and answers also. She says no. A very assuring no. Can the subaltern speak? Spivak says no. Subaltern cannot speak because the entire structure of global language does not give them a platform to be heard. The patriarchal power does not give them any objective platform to be heard. When a Western academic tries to speak for them, that ends up silencing them even further. People fighting for somebody else's cause actually makes the others more weak. Think about it. Therefore, fight your own cause. with this, I'm done with the lecture of the day. I'm so happy we've started with this crash course. If you loved it, please drop down a comment and be with me. Next week, I will come with another video based on literary theory. This is Hina from Team Wala. Take very good care of yourself. Bye bye.